Ready to go, Your Worship.
Okay. Then I will call to order the council workshop for July 19th at 7 o'clock. My name is Mike Little, Mayor for the District of North Vancouver, and the pleasure falls to me to welcome everybody here to this workshop. This workshop is being convened in an entirely virtual manner, which means all participants, council staff, members of the public will be participating in this meeting virtually. In part, that's because we are rewiring our committee room and our council chamber to improve its capability to handle hybrid meetings going forward. And so it is currently out of commission. And so this meeting will be hopefully the last meeting that we have to have outside of the council chamber. When we resume after the summer break, theoretically, those spaces, one or both of those spaces, will be available to us when we resume. But at this point, tonight's meeting will be handled entirely virtually. Council, we have an agenda that's been circulated. Are there any errors or omissions from the agenda as presented? Hearing none, will someone please move adoption of the agenda? Moved by Councillor Hanson, second by Councillor Bond. Call the question on the matter. All in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. There is one set of minutes that was included in the package. This is from the June 20th council meeting, council workshop. Are there any errors or omissions from those minutes as presented? Hearing none, will someone please move adoption of the council workshop minutes? Moved by Councillor Forbes, second by Councillor Bond. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. Thank you very much. So tonight we're here to discuss one aspect of the compensation that comes back to the municipalities during the course of development. This is really an area that has an element of flow-through costs. This is the improvements that we need to do in and around a construction site, and to make sure that that growth is contributing back to building the infrastructure in and around development, immediately around a development. This is directly for servicing those projects. And here tonight to describe the review and where we're at is Rick Daniluk from our finance department. But I'll just check, Mr. Stewart, did you have any opening comments?
Yes, I do, Your Worship. We're on a bit of a speed dial. I can't describe it any other way. Construction costs are escalating quite dramatically. We're hoping that they'll come down at a certain point. But I just wanted to assure council that we've had these dips and valleys over the years. And what we do is either defer projects, change the scope of projects, reallocate money, defer it to the next year. I mean, there's a number of tools that we have as staff to make sure that we remain in budget. And that's our intention at this particular point. But I will give you a couple of examples where we literally, for example, just on a water main project, had a 33% increase in what was bid on the quotes. And so we're going to struggle with that a bit. I could come to council every time and say, by the way, we've got a budget override on a project, but you don't need to understand that. I mean, that's what you pay us to do. And what we will do is manage these projects, and we'll report back in the fall as to what the impact is. But it's quite likely we're going to have up to a $75 million, what we call tail, which is projects that we can't get done because we don't have the resources, or the quotes are so expensive. So that'll be continuing into 2023. And I don't want you to be scared about that. That's something that happens every year, and we will manage that. But what I want council to be informed about in the fall is what that means to projects that we've got planned. So I just want to, as Rick goes through the process, to explain why we need to actually bump the DCCs, for example, up a significant amount. It just has a lot to do with the cost of construction, the cost of consulting, the cost of everything right now. We've got about, right now, 44 full-time vacancies in the district. We have staff that are being actually offered 50% more than they're earning in the public sector to work for the private sector. I'm not complaining about that. I'm just saying that's the reality that we're in right now.
Yeah.
So Rick's presentation this evening is just really to give you a sense of kind of how we're trying to adapt to that, and we'll be coming back in the fall with better information as the situation unfolds. So I'm not concerned. I'm really comfortable that we can manage it as a municipality, but I'm just letting you know that things are a little unsettled right now, and we're just going to have to work through that. Okay. So I'll turn it over to Rick. Sorry, Rick. That was really a doomsday introduction. But
thank you for the introduction, David, and I think you painted the picture quite well. That is the environment that we're working in right now, especially looking at our capital planning and how we review our development contributions to make sure that they're keeping pace with both rising costs and changing program needs. I'll just share my screen here so we can move to the presentation.
Okay.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Council, and members of the public tuning in. The purpose of today's presentation is to provide a very brief update on the progress staff have made on the review of developer contributions and share the next steps in the process. This review aims to ensure development continues to pay its share of infrastructure and amenity costs as the community grows by amending our development cost charges, or DCCs, and community amenity contributions, or CACs. CACs will be the subject of a future workshop. DCCs are used to fund road, park, and utility infrastructure and development's share of that infrastructure. And CACs are generally used to fund rental and affordable housing, community facilities, and other amenities to meet community goals. With rising costs and changing needs, many municipalities are reviewing these contributions. Rate increases have been high, but contributions continue to make up a small portion of the total development revenue realized through the development process. These contributions are an inherent part of development, the same as lumber, concrete, and labor. If rates don't match costs, it will put pressure on the district to fund these costs from other sources. I think we've done a relatively good job keeping pace with rising costs, and since the start of last year, things have really started to change. Staff continue to keep information related to this review up to date, including changes to inflation, as well as plans and as David indicated, potential changes to legislation. Amending the DCCs is the focus of tonight's presentation and the next step in the review. And this presentation will take approximately 10 minutes. And our general managers are also on hand to answer any questions you might have. The scope of this review is broken into a few parts. So the first and most basic part involves an inflation adjustment to the development cost charges planned for this fall. This adjustment is limited by legislation and is the next step in the review. The second part provides an update on the review of the development program. And that part is a comprehensive review that includes a refresh of the growth forecast, required investments to support that growth, and the contributions required to ensure development continues to pay its share of costs. So that's much more complex a review, and we have some initial results to share with you tonight. There are also a number of emerging considerations and risks to address during this part of the review. In order to keep pace with rising costs, development cost charges need to be adjusted for inflation. DCCs are more tightly regulated by the province and were last amended in April of 2018. Since then, inflation increases were within the normal range just up until last year, when prices began to spike due to global supply chain and other issues. Construction prices is a good way to measure inflation costs related to our charges, like development cost charges. construction prices in the Vancouver area have now increased 20 to 35% since the DCC rates were last amended. While most economists are predicting a return to lower and steady levels of inflation towards the end of next year, there's still a high level of uncertainty in these forecasts. But we're also hoping for things to stabilize. To move forward with this DCC inflation adjustment, the district will require approval of the Inspector of Municipalities, a provincially appointed position for the inflation adjustment that we're planning for the fall. This approval generally takes place following the first 3 readings of the bylaw. While a more significant inflation adjustment based on construction inflation is warranted, the legislation currently limits DCC inflation adjustments to the Vancouver Average Consumer Price Index. Using this index, the cumulative rate increase since the last change to our DCCs is approximately 15%. When staff bring back the DCC bylaw for amendment this fall, proposed rates will reflect the latest information on inflation. So I think there's a couple more adjustments to the index that might take place, or that will take place before then. One for June and one for July. The one for August probably won't be ready. The one for June is actually, I think, going to be released tomorrow. The adjustment for inflation is not expected to substantially change the district's position in the region when comparing our rates to other municipalities. And moving forward, we'll be adjusting these rates annually along with other fees and charges. The second part of the review is the broader development program analysis that will be used to recalculate our rates. This analysis includes anticipated growth, working with the community planning department, the amenities and infrastructure required to support that growth, and working both with planning and engineering on that one, and the design of rates for each of the rate groups based on that information. So the planning staff, engineering staff, and finance staff have been working hard on this more intensive review, and we're making progress. While there's more work to do, the interim update anticipates an average increase in the range of 40% for our development cost charges based on the information we've produced today. The increase reflects changes in construction inflation, as mentioned earlier, and the infrastructure program. Transportation, infrastructure, and land costs are the key drivers for the increases outside of the construction inflation adjustment. And more changes are anticipated as we complete the review and review the emerging considerations. Other municipalities are reviewing their DCCs as well, and are also coming in with higher rate increases, and similar to the one that we're landing on right now. If we were to implement this change, the combined DCC and CAC contributions would remain less than 5% of the development revenue. So a relatively modest amount and comparable to other jurisdictions, but from the rates that we have today compared to the rates that we would have afterwards, it is a large rate increase. To offset the DCC increases, staff will continue to explore options. David mentioned a number of them, and alternative funding is also another one. We'll be monitoring available grants. We'll also be integrating the impacts from the emerging considerations that are shown on the next slide. So in addition to rising costs and changes to the development program, a number of other changes are under consideration. A longer planning horizon would provide more flexibility and support closer alignment with regional planning. So as a first step, staff are considering moving to a 15-year planning horizon from the current 10 years. Setting limits on developer charges has also come up in discussions in the region. As an example, Vancouver limits their charges to not more than 10% of the construction value of the development. As I mentioned, a percentage of development revenue, that is another approach, as is using a benchmark for our existing infrastructure and amenities. To ensure fairness in the contributions, we'll also be measuring related impacts from all growth, and that includes working with Dan's group in the recent work around growth in the single-family neighborhoods and the new capital costs that may be imposed by single-family infill development. Although not the focus of tonight's presentation, rising land costs may result in lower community amenity contribution revenue in the future. To mitigate this, setting a minimum rate for community amenity contributions inside the town and village centers might be appropriate, and will be discussed at that future workshop I mentioned earlier. To improve transparency, staff will also be including the value of affordable housing waivers in the background report that's produced along with the DCC bylaw. That's during the comprehensive review. That additional information will be helpful in showing the full future cost of our municipal obligations under the program. Staff are also revisiting whether to keep our charges for multifamily homes, our DCC charges for multifamily homes on a per unit basis, or to leave them based on floor area. DCCs that are charged using floor area generally encourage the development of smaller homes. So that's also a consideration. And many municipalities seem to be moving towards the unit rate rather than the floor area rate. As we maintain a rolling capital plan and the development program through this work has now been fully integrated into that planning, we have an opportunity to make these adjustments more frequently. And with that in mind, staff are considering updating the charges annually for inflation, as well as every 2 years for changes to the program. There are a number of risks to consider during the review as well. Staff are working closely with a consultant in the ministry to ensure the legislation is followed and only eligible costs are included in the program. We'll also be reviewing in-stream protections for applications already received. And in 2019, the Tsleil-Waututh Nation applied to the Government of Canada for an addition to reserve involving lands currently under the district's jurisdiction. So a future federal decision on the Tsleil-Waututh's addition to reserve proposal will determine if related impacts are reflected in this review. Translink's Transport 2050 plan commits to delivering a rapid transit connection between Park Royal and Metrotown, and cost estimates for the district's share are uncertain at this time. Staff have updated the DCC program for the latest information on land acquisitions required in the transit corridors, but more discussions with Translink and our North Shore partners is required to confirm options and impacts. Another risk is the likely increase in regional development cost charges, and those will need to be considered. Further increases are anticipated through Translink and Metro Vancouver, so we're working closely with both of them as well. David mentioned the province's review, and so I'll leave that those comments to him, and move on to next steps. So while the scope of the review includes a full analysis of the development program, and we're anticipating completing that work by the end of the year, the immediate next step is to adjust our DCC rates for inflation in the fall. So staff are planning on bringing back the DCC bylaw for this inflation adjustment this September. And with that, I'll conclude the presentation and turn it back.
Thank you, Mr. Daniluk. Mr. Stewart?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that Rick has glossed over. We're competing with Translink and Metro on DCCs right now. So the timing is really critical, because if they introduced regional DCCs and Translink DCCs, you know, we're from a timing standpoint, we're going to be compromised to a certain degree. So we are, you know, very conscious of this, but it's a reality in the region, and it just increased costs for development. And I'm not arguing against the fact that Metro needed to have water DCCs a long time ago. Not arguing that Translink needed to have some DCCs, albeit to encourage development along the corridors. But we're just giving you a sense of the environment that we are as a staff and politicians trying to deal with. This is a very, very volatile environment, and it will be for the next 2 or 3 years. I just want to say that to you. But that being said, you know, as district staff, we're managing this to the best that we can, and you should be confident that, you know, we're not going to do anything that's crazy, because we can't. We really do appreciate and understand that there's a lot of concerns about taxation just override, and that's everywhere, you know, and who pays for what. So I just wanted to conclude with that comment that you know, we are very cognizant of the competing interests that are out there, and they are out there, and that's going to be one of our challenges we get in the fall.
Okay. Thank you for your comments, both Mr. Daniluk and Mr. Stewart. You know, I think the increases are going to be a bit shocking. The groups that are particularly vulnerable to that are the ones that are in stream. And so I guess my question, Mr. Daniluk, is at what point in the development are the DCCs set in stone or calculated? That is, at the time of the building permit issuance, at the time of rezoning, at the time of, at what point in a project are they assigned, just for the record?
It's my understanding that at the building permit issuance, and there are a number of considerations. We've actually just been going back and forth with the consultant on the particulars.
Mr. Milburn has a comment on that, and that's probably his wheelhouse. So there you go.
Good evening. Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. So the Act provides for, this is the Local Government Act in this case, provides for the payment of development cost charges either at the subdivision or building permit stage, and that's set out in the bylaw. And there actually is a statutory rules set out in, it's section 568 of the Local Government Act, that specify how in-stream applications, both for rezonings, development permits, and building permits are to be handled. So it's to ensure you know, consistency of rules as we go along, and that applicants aren't unfairly burdened by, you know, new fees or changes along the way. So it's actually set out in statute, and staff have to follow that. So every time the fees increase, we look at the snapshot of the applications that are currently in stream as defined by the Act, and then they have the appropriate fees applied to them. That's different for rezoning. Through the rezoning process, well, sorry, pardon me, as I mentioned, the rezoning rules are set out in the Act as well. So happy to go into that in further detail, but essentially that's managed through statutory applications. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. But I mean, with the obvious break that we have with the summer break and then going into the election period, projects that were approved in the spring and are underway will likely be able to go under the old rate system, or is the dividing line going to be actually somewhere in the projects that have already received rezoning because they haven't actually received their building permit yet?
Your Worship, but it's associated with the once they've submitted the applications for consideration, so complete applications being submitted. This is different from the approach we take for community amenity contributions, where you'll recall when we increase the fees, we often give substantially, we often give like a 6-month window or a period of time for applications to flow into the district. So different because that isn't a statutory system, whereas the system set out, we're really just following the Act in every case. So we look at the timing of the fee increase, and we look at what applications are already in place, and they typically have the old fees if they had complete applications in place.
I just want to make sure we're not creating a situation where there's all of a sudden a rush to get full applications in to get under before the 40% increase potentially in DCCs. Mr. Stewart, do you have additional comments?
Yeah, I'm just going to say the DCC has a delay, and Dan can talk about that. It's not something that's immediate. What is more concern to me is what the province is going to introduce as requirements for municipalities. Dan can maybe comment on this a little closer, but my intel says that those reports that we provided on what our targets were are going to be, and this is very similar to Ontario. They're going to be prescribed to municipalities, which is to say, if we have a target, you have to meet it, and that's going to be a real challenge for North Vancouver District, because we've always tried to be quite balanced in terms of what we implement and don't implement based on the input of the community. So we're going to have some issues in the fall, but I don't want to be overly be alarmed about that. But my concern right now is that we are going to be pushed by the province to provide more housing than the community may support. And Dan, you may have some comments on that.
Mr. Milburn?
Your Worship, there is a conversation that Council will be familiar with that has been going on for the last few years at the provincial level, with the release of two key reports, one related to the development review process in 2019, another related to improving access to new housing units, released a couple of years ago. And recommendations from those provincial reports suggested that expanding the range of infrastructure amenities that can be funded with development cost charges would be appropriate as a fee mechanism, and potentially eliminating community amenity contributions, which I know is not the topic for tonight, but it's related in these two. So that has been recommended in a couple of reports to the province. We know the province is likely debating that and considering that internally, and they have been implying publicly that they will be looking at significant changes potentially to the approval system. And then we're all waiting quite closely, trying to track the information that might come from the province and what that might mean for the district. And we'll update council as soon as that information is available.
So what I'm concerned about, council, the DCC system was always inadequate. It didn't cover enough of the things that we need to do to pay for development. And so CACs were introduced as an opportunity to do something sideways on that. And that's been fairly successful, depending on your perspective. But my big concern right now is we're going to get CACs rolled into the DCC system, and it's not going to be adequate. And we're going to be stuck as municipalities without CACs, which cover a lot of this soft stuff, Councillor Murray talks about plazas and all the rest of that stuff. But I mean, those are the things that make communities. And my big concern right now is that they will eliminate CACs. They will roll half of that into DCCs, and we will be stuck with the balance. Anyway, like I say, I don't want to alarm you. I'm just telling you that I'm reading the tea leaves. And I'm a little concerned about kind of the direction that the province is going, particularly if David Eby is proclaimed tonight. We're going to have a bit of a struggle in the region. There's no question about it.
Well, I don't know. I am expecting that the provincial government will be making some changes. They've hinted at it going into the fall. I don't know what the nature will be, but you can guess that it's probably not going to be to add powers to the municipalities and add options for the municipalities. It's probably going to be the opposite. But presuming something that they haven't actually released yet, so it's a little bit risky. Other members of council, any questions off the top? Councillor Bond, your comments?
Yeah, I got a couple comments, and maybe I'll just tie into this thread about the cost and impact and where we're going in terms of fees and charges. I think it's interesting if you look back over at least the short term of urban development in BC. the pendulum seems to swing back and forth. I think, when we talk about equity and growth paying for growth in, even less than maybe 30 years ago, maybe 40 years ago in this municipality, most of the growth related impacts due to development were paid through land sales, and taxes were kept artificially low. And so, the municipality as a corporation cashed in on its equity in its land, and I do have a visitor here helping me out, cashed in on its equity in land, and that's, that cashing in and artificially keeping tax rates at 0% for years and years and years was actually a huge benefit to residents that moved in at those parts of time. So that's kind of at the municipality as a corporation or as an entity subsidizing to a great extent the development of housing and facilities and roads and all those types of things at that point in time. Now we've kind of swung to the other side of the equation where basically every incremental impact of a new home in the community is paid for, not 100%, but quite close, I would think, Rick, based on the detailed reports that I've seen in all of our, the DCC bylaws and how the engineers and your team work together to break down all of the, both the replacement, renewal, and then the net impacts of new infrastructure. And so we've kind of swung that way, as like every single new home pays almost all of its incremental impacts. And so we might be it seems like we might be back swinging somewhere, maybe more in the middle. And obviously that's going to be an adjustment if that comes from the province. But I think that's important, especially when we talk about equity, is to look at the long term and see, as a community, how have we swung back and forth in who pays for what. The other point, and maybe just a specific point on what was mentioned during the presentation, is the floor area calculations. And I know even if you just run, the standard, new replacement single family dwelling versus a multifamily one, the floor area calculations are significantly less for single family. The per square foot or per square meter rate is so much lower than it is for apartments or townhomes. What did I do on my calculation? I've got the calculator here. It's probably close to half, I think, right? In terms of the DCC rates. So, it kind of adds into that, there's an ongoing debate in academia and, political courses, between housing activists and other people about how the incremental charges of whether they're DCCs or CACs or any of these additional fees that are being charged impact the availability of housing, overall, the cost of housing. I don't, Mr. Milburn, you probably follow. I would assume that you probably follow some of that discourse, but I think that also comes into play in terms of where we set these rates and how we determine who pays for what. I don't have any more kind of specific comments. Mr. Danilek, it's overview presentation, obviously, but thanks for the update. It will be, I guess, interesting in the Chinese proverb sense of the way to see what kind of decisions the province makes coming up, likely after the next municipal election, if I remember correctly. But general comments.
Your Worship, if I could interject, I would just want to say I really appreciate the human aspect that you provide to this, because we forget that sometimes. But, we forget that we have kids, that we have other responsibilities, and I hope you're not embarrassed.
No, I'm about to get my face drawn on, probably in marker, but
well, she didn't lick you, so
not yet. Yeah.
Anyway, the point is, we're all human beings, and we're all trying to serve our community. And I just wanted to comment that, you've served a long time on district council, and I really appreciate the fact that your kids were involved in this. Mike's kids would be involved in this.
Yep.
On and on and on. So thank you.
Not sure if Mr. Milburn wants to expand on that ongoing debate on the impact of fees and charges on the housing system, I guess, as we would call it. Yeah.
We could probably make lots of suggestions for the kids right now, and they'd probably do them.
Yeah, give them some crayons. They'll figure this out.
Hasn't had a mustache for a while. Mr. Milburn.
Thank you, Your Worship. So certain ability within the Act, and I always refer to the Act because this is a highly regulated fee structure. This isn't a tax, it's a very constrained fee. And so when I refer to the Act, it's because the rules are limited. So development cost charges may be waived or reduced in very particular circumstances. There are also circumstances where they're just not payable, they're not due. Council, and I think what's being alluded to is council may waive or reduce development cost charges for development which is designed to result in a low environmental impact. So this tries to tie the concept of a property, sort of a net zero property, may have less impact on the existing infrastructure in terms of producing stormwater or demanding water be provided, for example. And therefore, that is potential engineering justification for a reduction to the fees because you might need less downstream infrastructure. And some communities have applied that in targeted ways in order to incentivize certain types of development. Of course, being an engineer yourself, you know that it's challenging because the system is not designed for one-offs. It's not designed for pilot projects, case studies. And so a typical property with 48 fixtures in it, from water spouts to toilets to sinks, produces a typical range of demand for water and production of stormwater. And we design our systems based on medians and typical curves for the capacity of the system. And so it's difficult to say, we now need 2 millimeters less in our pipe, and so that's what we're going to buy next time. We'll buy a 2 millimeter less pipe, and replace it. So challenging, but I think what's useful about the exercise that Mr. Danielek is going through is the information is all public at the end of the day. There will be a public report presented, which will describe all the key assumptions that we use to try to achieve reasonable prices using the consistent rules of attribution. So is the development attributable, is the infrastructure attributable to that development, and proportionality. So is it proportional to the demand that's being imposed by the project as well? So we define those assumptions. They're laid out very clearly, and then council can, within the Act limitations, kind of modify those to try to address key local needs. One of those being a reduced environmental impact. And so we'll specifically have those conversations. I understand Mr. Danielek's report will address those going forward. And I've probably spoken long enough, but that's just one example of how you can use this tool very specifically, but done in a public way and a transparent way.
I'm wondering, maybe Mayor Little, if you'll indulge me another question. I'm wondering if you can also speak to the assist factor and how that's used in different municipalities across the province.
Mr. Danielek has been doing research recently, so I'm sure he has a clear idea of what's going on elsewhere.
Well, thanks for the question. When looking in the Lower Mainland, there seems to be a trend to keep it at that 1% level. And looking broader across the province, I think there might be higher rates, but the focus in the Lower Mainland has really been trying to follow the rules as Dan has laid them out and make sure that the apportionment is accurate and reasonable and attributable. And then the assist factor, if council chooses to increase that factor, that of course is up to council. Right now we're starting at that 1% level, and we can open that up for discussion. It's important also to note that through the waivers that are currently being applied for affordable housing, that's also an assist, and it's not a transparent assist. So that's why we're going to be including that in the background report. So there's more visibility on how we're really assisting through this mechanism.
Thank you.
Yep.
Looking to other members of council for questions or concerns at this point. Again, most of this action is going to follow forward in the fall. Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Worship. I think the shifting or the losing of the CACs wasn't a question of if, it was a question of when, for anybody who's been paying attention for a long time. The CACs did really help when they came in, but I think a lot of municipalities, and I'm not saying us, but a lot of municipalities started relying on that for the revenue lines, and that's always concerned me. But in any case, I had a question. We're trying to move to the 15-year planning horizon, which is closer to the regional. Now, when you say 15-year planning, what exactly are you referring to in that planning?
Thanks for the question. Through your worship, we're looking at moving to a rolling 15-year plan. And so every year, so going into 2023, it would be 2023 plus 15. And then the following year, it would be, we'd maintain that 15-year planning horizon. Many municipalities take that approach. Previously, we had taken a build-out approach where we looked at the total estimated growth in the OCP and limited it to that time horizon. So this would be moving to a rolling plan, looking out 15 years. Other municipalities are going even further. Coquitlam, for example, is now matching Metro and Translink 2050. So in their rolling plan, they're going all the way out to 2050 to match the regional planning efforts. As a first step for us, I think it's appropriate that we move to a rolling 15-year plan and get all the participants at the staff level working towards that, and then look at a longer term as well. And I do find that the 10-year currently to be a bit of a constraint, and the 15 years would provide more flexibility for council in its directions to staff.
That's what I was going to ask you, if you foresee that this is going to be more difficult to have the 15-year rolling, or stay with what we have. But you've just answered that question, so thank you.
Sorry, I'm going to have to answer Rick's question a little more. When you go out 2 years, you have probably a lot of predictability. When you go out 5 years, you have less predictability. When you go out 10, it's not kind of wide-ass guessing, but it's getting close. And you go out 15 or 20 or 30, you're just doing it for the exercise. And I'm sorry, council, I'm being really honest with you. The fact of the matter is, circumstances change, and 5 years we're probably pretty okay. I really support the idea of going out broader, but you have to appreciate that it's full of uncertainty. So I'm sorry, Rick. I just have to be really honest about that.
I understand. I totally understand that. That's why I was sort of hinting at the fact when I said it's going to be a little more complicated, because trying to read the genie ball for 15 years out is going to be more difficult, obviously, but it might, if things go as planned, might allow, like you said, more flexibility, as long as we have little dips and little increases and not huge swings, which adds more risk, obviously, the farther out you try to project. When I was looking at other municipalities' rates, some of them are already much higher, like you're talking about. Is that correct? Are we sort of late in the game of doing this, or like have most of the other municipalities already looked at this and brought something in, raised their DCCs?
Mr. Daniel?
Yeah, through your worship. As I mentioned in the presentation, many municipalities are trying to catch up. So I wouldn't say we're late in the game. I would say that along with a long list of other municipalities, we're we're amending for good reason. In terms of the rates and comparisons, we are middling as we were last time with the apartment rates. We are still competitive with the commercial rates, and we do lead in the industrial rates for DCCs, and that's due to the large investments in transportation supporting industry. So during the last review, sorry, go ahead.
No, I think your point, Rick, is though we're not late, and in many cases, in fact, we've been ahead of the game, and we've certainly tried to keep up. But there are many municipalities that have not reviewed even their DCCs, and Rick, you can connect me, in 10 years, and we're moving to a 2-year review, or a much more frequent review. So.
I didn't mean that as a criticism that for some reason we were dragging our heels. That's not what I meant. I did do some reading, and I can't remember, but I did see a couple of municipalities that had higher rates, and that's what I was sort of asking about. I wasn't meaning anything bad about the district, so don't take it that way, please.
I didn't take it that way. It was a good question. Yeah.
Good. I'm just looking at my scribbly notes. I think, oh, just bear with me one more sec so I can read some more scribbly notes. Community cost share. Nope, I think that, I think the scary part is what the province is going to do, and then what the DCCs for Metro and Translink. I mean, those are the two things that are really going to impact us quite a bit. Anyway, I think you've answered my general questions. I know this is just sort of a general coverage, and you've answered the things I was most curious about. Oh, one other thing I was curious about. Because of COVID, there's been so much out about recreation and open spaces and park, and especially as we get more dense housing, there's been quite a push on that. And I think there was even a statistics, and I can't remember, but there was a stat that was put out about per how many households require so much parkland. And are we going to be able to either increase or sustain? And I don't mean as far as taking the land, I just mean as far as developing possibly more park space as we're increasing our housing. Will that be impacted by this DCC? And because that's part of the infrastructure that the DCC, the developers should be covering. I know, Your Worship, you said it has to be right close to the building, but it's worked out on a formula, is it not? Am I incorrect that it's worked out on a formula of new housing and how much park space that should be available for that new housing?
Yeah, so we have the most urban parkland and the most rural parkland in the Lower Mainland. And so the challenge for us right now as we create town centers is to ensure that there's urban parkland for somebody to go to. You can't live in an apartment and not have access to urban parkland. And so that's the focus right now. And so you're seeing, as we develop whatever town center it is, we're trying to create places for people to go within that particular area. Now, I mean, they have the broader opportunity to go to the mountains and all the rest of it. But the fact of the matter is that right now we have one of the best percentages of urban parkland, and we just have to continue to do that as we develop the town centers. We have to make sure that the town centers have places for people to go as they leave their apartments. They need some green space, and that's part of the plan. Dan, you may want to comment on that a little bit more. But.
Well, I'm just going to chime in on that just a smidge. but it's not just going to be a square foot per square foot kind of calculation. It's about intensity of use as well, making sure that we have a variety of options within our park system, including close to population centers, having programmed spaces with services and features, and then also having a mix of quiet spaces nearby as well, and then great places for outdoor recreation in the areas beyond. But it's not, you know, I know that some people want us, for every single new person that comes into the municipality, we should have X square feet of park added. And I think it's probably more effective to just measure it in terms of investment in you know, appropriate park services for depending on the density of a neighborhood, and trying to add intensity of use in spaces where we have high population centers.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question, Your Worship. We have actually some of the best ratios in the entire region in terms of urban and rural parkland.
But at $8 million a square foot, we're not going to be adding land volume as rapidly as densification occurs. It's going to have to be achieved through intensification of use of the space that we have as a primary target. But
thank you. I was just wondering if we can leverage, you know, some kind of cost reduction to the developer for providing something that we may need, you know, more either small parks or something towards a park that's already developed but closer to that development. I just don't want to lose. I mean, I know how important the parks are, and I'm just scared that, you know, the CACs, if they get cut in half and only half of that goes into the DCCs and costs are going up all the time. I just want to make sure that something like parks don't get lost, because they're very, very important for mental health and physical health as well. That's all. That was where I was coming from.
It's a critical part of the character of our community. Mr. Milburn, your comments?
Thank you, Worship. Absolutely, park needs are defined in our park plan, and they're also described in the official community plan, and in all the various town center implementation plans and public realm guidelines. There's further definition about the locations within the town centers where that planning has occurred. And we typically acquire that additional parkland through negotiation at the time of rezoning. So developers often have lands where they end up contributing a portion of the land for expanded road networks, pedestrian network, as well as parks. Right. You know, we have recent examples that have come before council showing parkland contributions. Where that is not possible, you know, in circumstances where there isn't an anticipated redevelopment, there might be parkland DCCs needed to acquire and develop those parklands. But in the town centers, that's more the rarity than the norm, but still is needed in certain locations. And one thing that's quite important when we look at DCCs is we never use them to double dip. We don't create a DCC structure to acquire and develop parkland and also then get the money from another source and kind of double dip. So we're quite careful. There's very specific rules in the Act about that to ensure fairness as we ensure that we have enough park space. And just to assure council, I asked the Metro Vancouver Regional District Parks staff to give us a summary of parklands across the region. And I have compared those, shared that information with our parks team. And for municipal parkland, we're currently at 20.6 hectares per 1,000 people. The next closest community is West Vancouver, the district of West Vancouver, at 10.3 hectares per 1,000 people. So we are close to double any of the nearest. And that's just in municipal parkland. We actually compare very, very favorably when you look at all of the protected lands. So you include provincial parks and other protected areas. We also compare very, very favorably. The key question I think that's being raised, though, is how is it useful for the people that need it in their neighborhood? And so that's where we have to look closely at our capital plan, including using DCCs to help us fund really key improvements so that we can have those important spaces as our town centers grow and as our community grows overall. Thank you.
Thank you. That's good to know that number. Thank you.
Yeah, we need urban parkland. parkland in the middle of town centers, and we're doing that. So
I see Councillor Hanson a first time.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to say too much except to thank everybody for everything they've said. I've really appreciated, paid very careful attention to all of the comments and Mr. Danlick's report. I mean, broadly, I favor increased DCCs. My philosophy is that to the extent that people are moving into the community and development is occurring, that the costs of that should be borne by the people, by the development. Development should pay for development, and the existing residents shouldn't be incurring the cost of growth. Having said that, it appears, based on the discussion that we've had and political developments in the province, that we're going to have to watch very, very closely what's implemented in the fall, and I look forward to watching that very closely and respond and determine what our options and possibilities are at that stage. I gather from what I've heard that the vision is one of more prescribed growth, telling us the amount of growth that's required, and also telling us more prescribing the DCC and CAC rate. So thanks everyone for their comments. I'll be following it very carefully, and I'll be commenting more once we have a better sense of where the provincial government wants to take this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bond.
I just have something for you, Mayor Little, at the end of the meeting before there's, I guess, once everyone's done their comments and we've heard from the public or staff. So. Okay, well, we'll do our best to accommodate that, but you are the last speaker at this point. So if you want me to go to the public, and then I'm willing to do that. So any members of the public wishing to add their comments to the meeting, please raise your virtual hand and we'll do our best to incorporate your comments. I see Corey Cost, who has joined us virtually. Well, everybody's joining us virtually tonight. Corey Cost, can you hear me?
Yes, Your Worship, I can hear you. Can you hear and see me?
I can. Welcome. You have 3 minutes to address the workshop.
Where to begin? I'm sorry to say this is the first time I've ever said this. Almost every statement I've heard is incorrect.
Okay.
That should shock you a bit. I've been following DCCs for decades and warned councils over and over again that we are not paying our own way when it comes to DCCs and development. Certainly from the town centers I've seen, and particularly Lower Cap, there's a dearth of local park space. Less probably than there ever was, as far as room is concerned, and greenery. I don't know where to begin. Setting upper limits on development charges is a big concern if it means compromising the concept of development paying its own way, or growth paying for growth. I'm certainly concerned that in the last 4 years, there's been, I don't think I'm aware, that we've made any adjustments to our DCC rates. They're still the same as they always were 4 years ago. Yes, now we're 40% short. That means on average, the public purse has been deficient by 20% over each of those 4 years. The rising land costs should not be used as an escape mechanism to not have development pay its own way. Yes, it's going to be very difficult for us to purchase land in the places we need it. We have plenty out in the forests, out in the wilderness, but most of our parkland is in the wrong place. We have a deficiency in Upper Capilano here that has been pointed out to council by local leaders for a long time. The regional DCCs, I view them as taxation without any representation. Nobody voted those people in. They may have political representation, but they are not voted in by people. And I see a revolt against that form of, it was never the intent that regional district be a big taxing thing. Supply our water and take away our sewage. Keep our roads in repair. Lake country, I've sent a report about that, has really involved the public. You can see from the public statements that were input how the results follow and the directions follow in their choices. I urge council to read every bit that I sent to them recently. Of course, the section on in-stream is well described in one of the pages I recently sent on section 568, which Milburn alluded to. In my humble opinion, we are late to the game. I've looked at many other municipalities, and we are definitely late to the game on residential DCC revisions. I will continue to add to the report that I sent recently to council, as I expect it will double in size by the time you come back from holidays. And I hope it's useful. I try to be useful to tell you what's really happening around the province that we should be listening to. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any further hands from the virtual attendees here. Councillor Bond, you had a follow-up comment?
Yeah, okay, your turn. We got Coral made something for you, Mayor, a little while I had her distracted here. Do you want to show the mayor what you made for him?
Fantastic.
Will I tell him? Okay, here, I'll show it and you read it. You tell him. What does it say? It's probably backwards on the screen, but did you want to tell him what it is?
No, I can read it. It says, to the mayor.
From, you say it.
From Coral.
Thank you very much.
And what's he supposed to do with it?
You're supposed to color on it.
A little bunny and a, what is it?
There's two. So there's 2 wings on one dragon bunny, and then there's 2 wings on a fairy bunny, and the fairy bunny has a star on its head.
It does. So I'll bring that to you next time I see it so you can color it in at your leisure.
Fantastic. Dragon Bunny, you got a whole Disney series that you're bound to get out of that.
My comment is we need a heck of a lot more bunnies in local government when we do everything else.
That's a discussion for another night. All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for participating tonight. Thank you for the heads up, staff. I think it's important to keep an ongoing conversation about these things, watching the regional numbers and also seeing how we're going to have to respond to provincial policy. We have to stay on top of this. And I think it's fair, the comments from Dr. Koss, that sometimes we don't look at all of the categories of compensation back to the municipality in an equitable way, and perhaps addition of parks is something that we've taken for granted to some degree because we already have such a high ratio of parks in our community, and we've tried to focus on some other areas. But they're all important things to our community. And everybody who comes to the table is going to represent those priorities slightly differently. But I want to thank everyone for participating. Thank you, staff, for preparing for the meeting and getting us going. And I also want to wish everybody a fantastic summer break. This is the last public meeting for the council into the fall. We typically don't meet in the month of August. And so this is a bit of a long break for us as we head into the election season. And when we return in the fall in support of the provincial guidelines leading up to an election, we're going to keep the council agenda fairly light and focused on emergent and urgent issues or wrapping up matters of a rather neutral matter. So we actually still have a relatively light council agenda for the fall at this point as well, so that people can focus on on the community conversation around an election as well. So at this point, if somebody will move adjournment, I'd be happy to accept. Moved by Councillor Forbes, accepted. Thank you all very much for your participation tonight. Have a great evening.
Good night, everyone. Have a great summer.
Good night.